Hello, everyone. So, as the latest in our Rebel Women series, your playbook for a career in health and safety, I'm sitting here today with Nichola Harrison. And Nichola, what are you currently doing?
I've currently just gone through a change. My role was unexpectedly made redundant last month, and I'm starting an interim position with a last mile utility provider. Little bit of a change of direction, looking to review their business continuity and enterprise risk position with a view to working out for them to work out what they would like to do next. So it's a change, but very interesting.
Exciting. You've really landed on your feet there. So, tell me a bit about how you got started in health and safety. Was it something you set out to do? Were you doing something else first? And just a little bit about how your career has evolved.
Um, um, my career in health and safety started by accident, excuse the pun. It was not something like most people, it was not something that I was
No.
interested in, that I even knew anything about. But what happened was I was temping at a hospital, and somebody suggested to me that I was working with, they suggested to me that I would really like health and safety, and there was a permanent role going, and I should apply for it, which I did. And then I started working at Christie's the Auctioneers, and I had a combined role. I was looking after their health and safety for the UK, but also their facilities. And the thing that I learned is that managing facilities is really interesting, but the core of facilities management was about health and safety and making sure that people
Right.
had a safe place to work. And I also really liked the wider piece around speaking to people, and so I just went from there really. So that's been what I would call my career anchor. Is that while I've had diversified roles, health and safety has always been the kind of my core skill set.
You're a senior woman in health and safety. What sort of have you managed teams? Have you managed regions? What have you done?
Loads of stuff. I think one of the things that I love about safety is the variety that you can have. So I've been client, contractor, and a consultant, and I've loved all three for different reasons.
Brilliant.
And my last role was a global role, which was my first time managing globally. So I had a team based from Australia through to North America, and that was fabulous. Getting to grips with the different kinds of legislation, the different approaches, and dealing with the different cultures, because that was really different, and having
Yeah.
to consider how to engage with people to bring them on the journey. I found it I thought about it a lot, and it was really interesting.
That is something I'd really like to explore with you, actually, because I haven't explored that with anybody yet. But this idea of how you work globally, Ruth Denyer made me. She pushed and pushed until I read Erin Mayer's The Culture Map, and then I saw her speaking at the HSE Global Series, and I was like, oh my goodness me, these are just things that I hadn't considered, like how you operate at a meeting and the kinds of communication that people prefer and all of that. It's like so different from culture to culture, isn't it? So how did you get successful at that?
Well, I think it's like any relationship. When we're building it, it's about it, but a bit more complex because you've got that cultural layer on top of it. So most of my work was done through Teams, which already adds a challenging dimension because you've only
Yeah.
got this kind of facial bit to kind of go
Yeah.
off from a facial expression point of view. And for me, it was curiosity that I found really
Okay.
helped me. So I've always been curious. It's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I love health and safety as a career, is because it's allowed me to ask all of those questions that most people don't ask. So being curious and asking people, particularly my team, asking them about what the culture was like, how people worked together, how they communicated. And that was really eye opening. So, for example, I had a lovely health and safety manager in China, and Snow and I would talk quite a lot about how hierarchy works in China and how job title is super important. So with my global health and safety director job title, as soon as I walked into a virtual room, I was the most important person in that room. And that's not really me. I very rarely use my job title when I'm introducing myself or talking to myself. But understanding that my arrival in that virtual room totally changed the dynamics meant that I definitely asked more questions and probed and looked for reactions quite a lot, because I wanted to be sure that people weren't agreeing with me because of my
Just
job title.
because of
They
your
were
job
agreeing with me.
title.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so how many years roughly have you been involved in the profession then, Nichola?
Coming up for 20 now. So it's
Okay.
been a long, well, my whole career has been in
Yeah.
safety. So coming up for 20. And as part of that, as I said, I've worked in all sorts of different roles, managed different teams, and managed remotely as well. So it's been about 20 years. And within that time, as I said, I've been fortunate to have a really varied career, but I've also seen a lot of changes. I think the changes into well-being have been massive. And I remember in one of my first roles, it was really difficult to engage with HR, because for them, the people that I was dealing with and working with, they didn't see the crossover. And while I think the move and the shift in our profession to be more people focused from a well-being and a health point of view has helped that, I think it's still a real challenge. It's a real challenge to get information from HR. It's a real challenge to get them to see the value. And I would say that's probably one of the hardest mountains I've had to climb, in terms of whenever I start somebody new, it's almost rebuilding that relationship anew and getting them to buy into it. So I think there's been a lot of change, and I think all of it is to the good. I think it's important that we start to think about the whole person and the impact that work has, not just on what we're doing on a day-to-day basis in our employment time, but also out of our employment time.
Yeah, that's definitely a rich vein for us to look at. I interviewed Kathy Seabrook last week, and she said to me, "Oh, Heather, I had no idea what work you did. I just thought you did women in health and safety." And I said, "Well, how am I going to address that, Kathy?" And she said, "Well, ask people about well-being when you're doing the interview." So I said, "Well, I'll try that then." But anyway, yeah, I think from my experience, I've been doing this for 10 years now. And I think there was a move for health and safety professionals to get involved with wellbeing, and a lot of mental health first aid got done. And then it's very, very much moved back to HR, as far as I can see. And the only sort of lever that health and safety professionals seem to have now is psychosocial risk assessment. And that's really a lever which often they don't seem to be able to pull, because again, you need HR buy-in, don't you? You can't just do that as an exercise in its own right. You have to do it as a whole senior team. So yeah, I mean, so that's definitely a trend, as you've seen, obviously a growth in some of the whole person approach stuff, which is great. What other changes have you seen?
Firstly, can I say, I can't believe it's 10 years since you set up your business. That has flown by. I also can't believe that
Hasn't it?
somebody
I
didn't
know.
know what you did.
I know. Well, she was from the US, so I let her
Oh,
off.
fair.
But I
Yeah,
kept meeting her at conferences, and she was just, well, I knew you as women in health and safety, and I was thinking, well, I hope that's not where everybody thinks I just do women in health and safety. Not that there's anything wrong with women in health and safety, but it doesn't earn me any money.
yeah. um, you asked me, your question was about what else have I changed? What
Yeah,
other
what other changes have
changes?
you seen? And also, can you differentiate there between changes you've seen in the profession and also changes that you've had to make as you've got more senior? Because I do think there's an element of sort of, we talk about influencing skills and communication skills, don't we? But they have to be part of that. Is as you get more senior, you need those skills, don't you? And but equally, the profession in general has become much more about influencing, hasn't it?
Yes, it has, and I think I remember when I first started, it was have you got a checklist? It was
Yeah,
very much like the
yeah,
health and safety police, and it's still like that. I've still gone into organisations where the team that I've taken on, it behaves like that, and and one of the things that I come in and do is shift that to a more operationally centered approach, because I don't. Health and safety is not a thing that we can do in isolation. You know that. Most of the people listening to this will know that. But it always amazes me that there are still leaders in businesses um, who are not quite there and not quite
Yeah.
understanding that
Yeah.
kind of shift. And I think that absolutely links to what you're saying around the more senior I've become, the harder I've had to work around that influencing piece, because I think it's the the problem that I've found in my career. One of the hardest things is that um, we're judged on the exposure that we get from our work. I think very much that's how that's one of it's the pie model: performance, impact, and exposure. And that when we're a health and safety professional, I find that I'm spending a lot of my time bringing a negative message to the senior leadership team, because the majority of my airtime, other than the routine kind of monthly reporting, but even that takes up quite a lot of it, is where there's been something's gone wrong, something's not gone to plan, or where there's a compliance breach. So I think trying to what I've tried to do is shift that negative exposure to get more positive exposure, to be able to bring good news stories around work, where and that's for me where that link into operations is really important. So one of the really big good news stories in my last job that I did was allowing customers, or creating a way for customers to have access to chemical safety data sheets, which sounds really easy, but working in an incredibly bureaucratic, complex organisation, it was really challenging to find out where should these go, how should we access them, whether the customer could have, where we should put them, because of the IP. So there was intellectual property attached to some of the information, and that being able to bring that good news story to say, look, the health and safety team have solved this problem that the business has had forever. This is where we do good work. And for me, that helps improve that relationship with that senior leadership, to show that it's not just about here's another problem that we've found and here's the solution. It's that there wasn't a problem. You didn't know the problem, but here's the solution.
Do you know, I am feeling very ignorant, and I'm so glad I spoke to you this morning, because I absolutely love that. Have never heard of that pie model before:
Oh,
performance, impact, exposure. And I've never made the connection that you've just brilliantly made between that and the fact that health and safety is always talking about bad news. And actually finding those good news stories it must be like quite challenging. I remember I was working in a quarry recently, and they were saying that they'd done a safety review and they'd found a piece of machinery that was not only safer, but was more cost effective, because they'd been focused from a safety side. So that would be a good news story. But what kinds of other things can you use as good news stories for the senior team?
and that's part of the challenge, I think. And I think that very much depends on where you're working at the time and your organizational culture.
Yes.
Because if you're in a positive culture where you've got a strong base, I think it's probably a lot easier to find a good news story and to have that positive exposure. I tend to go into roles where there's lots of gaps, where there's non-compliance, where there's no assurance. There's lots of reassurance. Everybody thinks everything's fine because there's been no
Yeah.
accidents, but there's no physical assurance to evidence that everything is confined and compliant. And so that means that I've always found it really difficult to bring a good news story.
Yeah.
And so I really grab them when I can find them. So, and that I think is part of the challenge of being a senior leader, is
Yes.
finding the positives as well. One of the other ones that I was looking at was around cost saving. So
Yes.
as a
Yes.
supplier, a B2B manufacturer, we were using lots of different systems, client systems, and true to form, all of the names of all of the client systems have just escaped my mind. But think like Safe Contractor, that
Sorry.
kind of stuff. um, oh, typical, isn't it? You're trying to think of like the key thing for the story and you can't remember it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
We will
But it's
probably.
interesting. I remember that one of the companies I worked with very, very, very early on, they had all the British Safety Council swords up, and they had used that as a means of enrolling the board. Like, we're not doing great at the moment. Let's aim to have a sword. And they had all these swords. And I guess the other thing is like standards, getting standards and things like that. They would be helpful, wouldn't they? But it's such an interesting area. I'm so glad you've raised it, because it's not something I've ever really given too much thought to before. But actually, and I haven't even heard people talking about it that much. I do hear about the measures and the fact that everybody hates triffa, and yeah, and it's really difficult to find measures that are actually positive in health and safety, isn't it? But hadn't heard about that specific model, so I'm feeling ignorant, but also very grateful that you've brought that one up this morning.
Well, I have to thank a career coach that I had many years ago, and we did quite a lot of work. I worked with him for a while, and he introduced me to lots of different models, and the pie is the one that really stuck, because I've struggled, and I think this is probably something that quite a lot of people in our profession will connect to. I've struggled with the fact that I sometimes feel that I'm really good at my job, but nobody sees it and I don't get the
Yes.
recognition for it.
Yes.
And the pie model really explains that for me. And suddenly it was like the penny dropped and my eyes were totally opened, in that I am really good at my job, but all most people see, particularly at a senior leadership level, is me bringing a bad news story.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's not my bad
Yes.
news story. It's not my team that have done anything wrong, or my team that are not compliant. It's me bringing other people's bad news.
Other people's bad news. Yes. That you're the bearer of bad news,
Yes,
and they always get, tarnished by the bad news. Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, really, really interesting, because it also connects to something that I've been talking to people about, which is visibility in general in the profession for women. So when we look at speakers, for example, it over recent years we've got better at including female speakers in the sort of in what we're doing in conferences and things like that. But in the early days, it was all men that were doing all of that speaking, and quite often the famous academics, are all men again, aren't they? And I think the conversation I've had with a lot of women are that they don't prioritize it. They've got other things to do, and they think, an ultimate. But I had a conversation with Karen McDonnell about this, and she was saying, actually, being visible outside of your organization also helps you be visible inside your organization, because they want to hear you're speaking at this place, that place, you've written an article, they want to hear about it. So it's an
And I would,
interesting one.
it is, and I would say that that struggle isn't over yet, because it's only a couple of years ago that I went to a supplier-run health and safety conference, and I flagged with them, um, in the right way, my disappointment, because whole day not a single female speaker. It was
Yeah.
absolutely atrocious, because there's
Yeah.
loads of us out there, and
Yes.
I would say I had some really good career advice when I worked for Capita. I worked for a gentleman called Alan Herbert, and he said to me, "Get out there." Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I thought you might.
Yeah.
He said to me, "Get out there." He said, "Go and be the face of our consultancy and start speaking." So I did. It was so scary. It was so scary, but I loved it, and I still do it a lot now. Um, and it's really good self development. It's really good visibility, and it's really good networking, which I'm terrible at.
It's tough, isn't it? The whole networking thing. But in health and safety, people are very kind, and they're very willing to give you time and give you help when you want it, aren't they?
Yes, yeah, that's really true. And I think that's really useful, because it helps to grow and learn. I really like being able to have conversations with other people, to get ideas and to see how they've solved problems and how I can use that. But I think sometimes, and it comes back to that visibility, networking more broadly is really important as well. And that's quite hard to, because you go to a health and safety conference and it's all health and safety people. But actually, the thing that I've realized recently is I want to start going to um, more operational conferences, to
Yes. Yes.
meet the people who I would work with, not necessarily
Yeah.
my peers, because it's a different dynamic. My problem is I don't quite know where to start with that. So any guidance, support, or ideas, well.
I think it's a great point. I completely agree. I mean, the closest I've ever sort of seen to that is the HSE Global series, where they try and bring in people from other parts of the business. But more importantly, they bring speakers in who are kind of tangential to the profession, like Matthew Said, for example, on cognitive diversity, and Erin Mayer, who I mentioned earlier. I think that's another thing, is to keep your education as broad as you can, because health and safety touches on so many different topics, doesn't it really?
It does, which is the thing that I love the most about it. I can one of the first things I realised, which is, you asked me how did I get into health and safety, and when I think to back in the day, very early on, I realised that the beauty of health and safety is nothing is off limits. There's no area that I cannot link back to a piece of health and safety legislation, and that means that for somebody like me who's super curious and I just love gathering knowledge, it's brilliant because I can just go and be like, oh, tell me about that thing over there that I don't know what it is, and then that's kind of sparks thoughts around: is it safe? Is it not safe? Can it be safer? How does it connect with everything else? But also my own learning, which is really important, I think, to keep that cognitive brain ticking over. I think it's a mixture of both. I think I'm ex-military, and I've worked quite a lot in male-dominated environments, and I've really enjoyed that. But it brings challenge with it. I think one of the benefits of being female is having, quite often we think differently. We think more holistically. We think more. I think we think more joined up. And maybe see the bigger picture. I'm not necessarily talking about being strategic. I'm talking about connectivity and inclusivity. And I think that's something that women can particularly are really good at. But I think from a challenge point of view, I think we're seeing it at the moment, aren't we? There's lots of stories about women in their 40s and 50s struggling to find work in some cases, and that taking quite a long time. And I do wonder whether menopause is the new pregnancy. I think that's the beginning of my career. Women of that kind of childbearing age were in sometimes being discriminated against, and I wonder whether menopause is the new version of that.
Maybe. That's very interesting, because I hadn't considered that the whole focus on menopause and education around it might actually end up being a bit counterproductive in some ways. So yeah, interesting. Okay, thank you. So Rivera, where are we? Right. Looking back, what do you think made the biggest difference to your ability to succeed and stay the course in the profession?
Two things. I think one is some really good managers. So I've already mentioned Alan Herbert, who told me to get out there and get published and get speaking. And another manager, Catherine Hardy Smith, who told me to go and get a non-exec director's role. And that has been one of the most interesting strands to my career to date. Not only do I love it, but I've learned so much by going and being a non-exec. I started off as a school governor, and then I've grown now chair of the board for a small housing association. And there I've just done a typical female thing where I've negated my success by saying it's small. I'm chair of a housing association.
Very good. Yeah, very good. I love that. And why has being I know a few women that have become a NED recently. Why do you think it's a good thing to do?
As a senior leader, it totally transformed how I write my board papers. It just gave me a totally different insight into what the board want to see. And now I think about it, because I think before I wrote what I thought they wanted to know, now that I have that experience, I know what they want to know, and so I write differently. So that's the first thing, and I think that's really helped me to communicate and to represent my function and the business at that level in a much better way to the exec and to the board. And I think it's also about that connectivity. I spoke about being curious, and I think health and safety is connected to everything. I think it really helps the businesses that I work with, because I'm thinking about risk. I'm thinking about risk mitigation and those kind of things that I think that we bring that with our health and safety hat on. We think about risk, we think about probability and likelihood, we think about solutions, and that brings, for me, that's what I'm bringing to a board, is that that really broad approach and that connectivity and the linking up of
Okay.
things.
So, looking ahead, what legacy would you like to leave in health and safety, and what advice would you give to the next generation of women coming through?
I think I would just like to think that everywhere I've worked is a bit better because I was there. And we're all different.
Nice.
We all bring different strengths and weaknesses. And I'm sure the people that followed me went, "Oh, Nicola didn't do that, but she did do this." And I would
Yeah.
just like to think that every organisation I've worked with is better in some way because I was there and I gave to them. Not a particularly grand legacy, but hopefully I've impacted some people and made their lives a bit better. Um,
Yeah.
in terms of advice, get out there and do the things that are scary.
Right. Yeah.
Push the boundaries, find the edge of your comfort zone and then step outside it, whether it's getting out, getting somebody to let you speak in public, getting into a conference or something like that, or being published, whether it's going and speaking to that team that you find quite intimidating at work, whether it's going and exploring having a coach or a mentor. Do something that makes you feel uncomfortable, because that's how you grow, and that's how you, I think for me, that's helped me to decide where I wanted to be. I spent quite a long time in the manager, the middle manager role, and I was really enjoying it. And then I woke up one day and I was like, actually, I really want to lead. I really want to be strategic and be the person that's making those decisions and driving that strategy. And if I hadn't pushed myself to do some of the other things that I was doing before that point, I don't think I'd have got there, and I don't think I would have fulfilled my full potential.
Well, thank you so much, Nicola. I've got so much out of what you've said today, and I'm sure our listeners will too. So thank you so much for making the time for us. It's been lovely to speak to you today.
Thanks, Heather, for giving me the opportunity. It's really nice to be able to share, and hopefully it's interesting.